This conference is being recorded.
Monsieur le ministre Miller, vous pouvez commencer lorsque vous êtes prêt.
Kwekwe Ulukut Tansi. Hello, bonjour. Gaxika from Bella Bella First Nation, surrounded by water in Heiltsuk territory. I first do want to acknowledge and thank Chief Slett for welcoming me to her community and kindly letting me use her office for this announcement that affects all First Nations in Canada. This is a wonderful time to celebrate, particularly surrounded by water and with the team here today. I'm grateful to be joined by Chief Whetung from Curve Lake First Nation, Chief Spence from Tataskoyak First Nation, Chief Moonias from Neskantaga First Nation, nice to see you, as well as I understand some of the younger members of your community. Together, we're here to announce that we have reached an agreement in principle to resolve a class action lawsuit outside court related to safe drinking water in First Nations communities. And again, to underscore this, outside the courts, grâce à un dialogue ouvert,
through open dialogue, cooperation, and partnership, we're taking a key step towards our commitment that every First Nations person should have reliable access to safe, clean drinking water now and in the future.
Through this dialogue and process of cooperation and partnership, we're taking key steps towards our commitment that every First Nations person should have reliable access to safe, clean drinking water now and in the future. This agreement addresses several important concerns identified by First Nations, including $1.5 billion in compensations for individuals deprived of clean drinking water, the creation of a $400 million First Nations Economic and Cultural Restoration Fund to support community-level efforts, a renewed commitment to Canada's action plan for the lifting of all long-term drinking water advisories on public systems on reserve, the creation of a First Nations Advisory Committee on Safe Drinking Water, support for First Nations to develop their own safe drinking water bylaws and initiatives, as well as a forward commitment to support reliable access to safe drinking water on reserve with $6 billion in targeted supports, including capital and operations and maintenance. And finally, the modernization of Canada's First Nations drinking water legislation. We've been clear. Our commitment is to ensure that all First Nations communities have access to clean, safe, and reliable drinking water. This remains the same and is expanded from the commitment made in 2015. We've made real progress in partnership with First Nations since November 2015, but much work remains, and the chiefs here today will speak about it. As of July 28th, 2021, First Nations with support from Indigenous Services Canada have lifted 108 long-term drinking water advisories from the 105 that were in effect in 2015. In addition, and key to this commitment, 186 short-term drinking water advisories, which become long-term in a year if not remedied, have been prevented from becoming long-term. And projects are underway in 32 communities to resolve the remaining 51 long-term drinking water advisories. We will continue to work with all First Nations, including the nations here today, Tataskoyak Cree Nation, Curve Lake First Nation, and Neskantaga First Nation, to address their water concerns and more, and to develop sustainable long-term solutions to ensure the ongoing sustainability of water and wastewater on reserve, including the training of operators from communities. La conclusion de cet accord.
This agreement reflects the perseverance, dedication, and resilience of First Nations across the country. Chief Doreen Spence, Chief Emily Whetung, and Chief Chris Moonias, and now Wayne, I would like to say thank you for all the work your communities have done And together we'll move forward in a spirit of reconciliation to make sure that every First Nations community has access to safe, clean drinking water for generations to come.
Miigwech, Yanamik, Marci, thank you. Merci. And I believe it is now up to Chief Whetung to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Miller. Since the day I was born, my community has known that the supply and quality of water was insufficient to carry us into the future. Growing up, avoiding tap water was the way of life. Don't put your toothbrush in it. Don't rinse your mouth. Make sure you have enough bottled water to get through the long weekend. And people would get sick from the water. I got sick, and my family got sick. This way of life seemed unending, and simply put, just the way things had to be. In 2014, and again in 2016, the lack of water took on a whole new meaning for me. I became a mother. I have 2 sweet little boys, and my entire world changed. Every parent out there will understand how that changes your world. Every parent living on an Indian reserve will cringe as they think of the challenges I now had to face. It is no longer enough to simply plan for the next long weekend. There isn't enough water in the ground for my children to choose to live at home when they're adults, starting families of their own. My grandchildren would have to live away from me because they wouldn't have clean water to drink. In 2019, I had the opportunity to make a difference, to become part of the history of water advocacy my community has undertaken for nearly 40 years. For some perspective, that's 20 elections for our chief and council, countless staff members looking for creative solutions. For one particular staff member in our community, this has been his entire career. He started working on bringing clean water to our community when he was a college intern. I decided that it was my turn to take up the advocacy. I ran for chief as my great-grandfather and his grandfather before him had done. In July 2019, when I took office, I had a mandate from my community to find a new way to bring clean water home. In October of 2019, the amazing council that I work with supported me in bringing our water concerns to court in the form of a class action. We sought support from our leadership organizations nationwide and eventually made our action into a national class action. In February 2020, when I met Minister Miller for the first time, we had a conversation about how the water situation in First Nations needed to change. We discussed how ending long-term water advisories simply didn't accomplish meaningful access to clean water. I explained that in order to be immersed in our language and traditions, our children needed to grow up on the only land base that we have been left with, and they deserve to grow up with clean water. I'm overwhelmed to stand here today, 2 years after my community trusted me with bringing a clean water home, 18 months after my first conversation with Minister Miller. I stand here today with the Chief of Tatasquiac and the Chief of Niskandaga. We have made a difference.
We're making a very solemn and deep commitment today to First Nations.
Trust is perhaps the biggest barrier to our relationship right here. It's why we even went down the road of a court process, because there are communities that felt not well served by Canada. And today, not wanting to drag out in an adversarial position where we have far too often been, and the reality is a different government may have decided to go into court and to fight this. We're not. We agree with the communities, and we want to get that water into the communities, but there needs to be a binding process, a mechanism with teeth. That's what the communities asked for, and we're glad to oblige.
Thank you. And I think, Minister Miller, I would just echo that sentiment that the history of agreements with First Nations in Canada is not always a great one. And so that was absolutely a part of the need to pursue a court action. However, I think the resolution of multiple class actions in recent Canadian history demonstrates that these are enforceable agreements, and that's what we're looking forward to seeing is the enforceability. But it was absolutely a quick process to get to this point. So miigwech for that.
Merci, Pierre. Can we have the next question, please?
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Brett Forrester, APTN News. Please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My question is on that topic of enforceability. Mr. Miller or perhaps Mr. Rosenberg, can you offer some more details about the enforceability and accountability mechanisms built into this deal? In other words, once this settlement is finalized, what would happen if a community then lapses into a long-term advisory or fails to have access to clean water?
And I'll dust off my my already poor legal skills from a prior career to perhaps answer this question. But I will also make the mistake of referring over to opposing counsel for their answers. But Brett, having an enforceable mechanism was key as part of these discussions to have teeth ongoing if a government were to fail. We've made a number of significant commitments, but a number of comments that we've received from a number of chiefs is if there's a change of government, that might not be the case. And that is a real and present worry. This isn't something that should be partisan. Any single government that is aspiring to lead this country needs to make these commitments and more to Indigenous communities. We've made a number, but we've got a number that we need to keep. That goes to the point that I made earlier with respect to trust and having an enforcement mechanism in place that we're going to gladly be part of is something that will allow, for example, and Michael can elaborate this for a party if they are breached to move towards summary judgment as opposed to getting in there and fighting it out publicly about points in contention. This is an agreement; it's binding, it has teeth. We expect it to do so, and I think more importantly, Canadians and Indigenous peoples most importantly expect that to be the case. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Minister. The crown jewel of this agreement is Canada's commitment to make all reasonable efforts to ensure that class members have regular access to clean drinking water in their homes. And what's contemplated is that in those class member First Nations where that's not the case today, they will have an opportunity to speak with the federal government and present their ideas as to how the commitment could be met in their community. And the hope is that there will be an agreement on the measures taken to reach that commitment in every class member community. If there's not agreement, then what's contemplated is there will be a dispute resolution mechanism, as the minister says. It's one that will respect Indigenous legal traditions. It will be acceptable and accessible to class members, and it will deliver a swift resolution to any disagreement so that the community and Canada can move forward with the necessary measures to ensure that class members, that the residents of that community have access to clean drinking water in their homes. If you think about it, this is about, sorry, this is really about converting what has up until now been seen by some as good governance or goodwill into rights that class members can rely on and can enforce. And that's the aim of the mechanism that I've described.
Sorry, Michael, it's Scott Farnlinger speaking from the Department of Justice. I would agree with Michael and indicate that he's summarized the planned dispute resolution process accurately, and it's something that's intended to move quickly and to respect Indigenous traditions. But at this time, we don't have further details. That's a matter that's still subject to negotiation, and something that's intended to form part of the broader settlement agreement that the parties are working on right now.
Thank you. As a follow-up, Minister Miller, I understand your department is trying to shift the focus away from, one overarching deadline towards what you describe as the broader commitment of the Government of Canada. But do you have any regrets about how the Liberal government in your department has handled this file since coming into power?
I sit here as the Minister of Indigenous Services for the past 18, 19 months. A large part of it has been dominated by a world pandemic. I regret that we were in this situation in the first place. This is a government, and the Prime Minister, first and foremost, stood up and said, we're going to get this fixed, and undertook to do something that was bold and frankly reflective of a basic right. That has a lot of power in this country. It has power to compel the civil service, first and foremost, to hold our obligations up vis-a-vis Indigenous peoples. I think that's a powerful message. And I'm proud of the fact that he did it. I'm proud of the fact that when there were amounts that were perhaps seen sufficient for the capital investments to, according to the strict terms of what is needed from our perspective to lift the long-term water advisory, we said to ourselves, we're not doing enough. We doubled down, and then we tripled down, and now we've quadrupled down. And that's something I think that shows the relentlessness of this government to put in not only political capital, but financial capital to it. This is a process, Brett, that has always been about building trust. It's not about shifting the focus. First Nations, Indigenous communities said, your focus needs to be on us and not your deadline. Where are you going to be after March 2021? We need to expand those water systems. We need operators that are the pride of their communities. We weren't doing that. So sitting down and saying to yourself, why do we need to increase operations and maintenance 2-3 times by 2022, 2023? Getting ahead of this and making sure that we are honoring those commitments and being quite honest and frank to all Canadians that expect this to happen, that we're going to do it. And so these communities said to themselves, we're going to use our legal rights. And we said, we'll sit down at the table and hash this out and make sure that it reflects the needs. This ongoing commitment is key. It was key to the success of this agreement in principle, and will be most importantly key to making sure that everyone has clean water. This is about historic reparation for harms done by past governments. It's also about the future. It's also about hope, and it's also about getting water into communities, to members who haven't had the benefit through no fault of their own of getting it. And that's what I'm proud of as a government. I do certainly regret that we were in a situation as a country that we consider to be the best in the world, but wasn't serving Indigenous peoples properly. It goes to perhaps every issue that I cover. But I'm glad we did have that ability to sit down, didn't have to be in an adversarial position, debating, the perhaps petty points of law. We got this done, and we'll continue to get it done. And now we have an agreement that will have teeth.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This concludes today's press conference. C'est ma fin à la conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup.